Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is wane. Let's take a moment to look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear wane used is to mean to have a feeling or a condition decrease in power or intensity. Now, I've heard from some viewers of these videos that, oh my goodness, sometimes they can seem a little long and I maybe talk too much. And so some people have shared thoughts, constructive ideas on how to make them so that people's interest does not wane, that it does not decrease. I thought that might be a good example for here to connect with. And it's my hope that feeling of, oh, I want to learn more does not decrease as you watch this video. A second way you might hear the verb wane used is to have something become weaker. So these first two definitions very much connected, where we're talking about a decrease or a weakening of some feeling or condition. A third way you'll also hear wane used is to mean to decrease in size, extent, or degree. We'll look at a couple example sentences later that will connect to that definition. A fourth way you'll hear wane used is to mean to fall gradually from power, from prosperity, or influence. This definition you might see in connection to articles or texts written about history. So it might be talking about one political parties, for example, their influence decreasing, that they gradually fall from power. A fifth way the verb wane gets used is in connection to the moon. And you might be aware of sort of what you're able to see and the size of the moon. What's illuminated at night is continually changing. So this definition is connected to where what is visible from the moon gets progressively smaller. So it looks like, or it appears to us, that the moon is decreasing in size. You should know that wane is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, you're going to drop the E on the end before you add the suffix that starts with the vowel letter I in G. That'll form waning, waning. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by just adding the letter D, since this verb already ends in an E. Our base verb, wane, ends in a voiced N sound. This means that our past tense ending is going to make a D sound, and we're not going to add an extra syllable as we say it. It should sound like this: waned, waned. Okay. Now, you might be relieved to know we don't have any additional phrasal verbs that we need to study with this verb. So now we can practice making some sample sentences with our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today, we're going to practice with the past progressive and the past perfect. Let's start with the past progressive. Some teachers and some textbooks and other teachers on YouTube here might call this the past continuous. I think it's good to know both names of this. They mean the same thing. So in this verb tense, we're talking about an action that was ongoing during some point in the past. Many times this ongoing action gets interrupted, and that interrupting action will be in the simple past tense. But this verb tense is, again, really illustrating for us that something was continuing or something was progressing. Now, the reason I like calling this the past progressive is that the two letter P's in the name of this verb help me remember I need two parts to my verb. So in the affirmative, when I go to make a sentence here, I'm going to start with my subject, and then the first part of my verb is going to be the past tense of be. So that could be was or were. Depends on what my subject is. The second part to my verb is the ing form of this verb. Okay, so let's take a look at an example sentence. Just as his attention span was waning, some interesting data was shared. Okay. So here, maybe think of someone who's listening to a lecture. This could be in school, it could be at a conference, right? And this person is kind of starting to lose focus. They're no longer paying attention. Maybe they feel like they know all of this, or nothing is really new. Okay. And then as that is happening, the decrease in attention here, something interesting gets shared. There's that interrupting action I was telling you about. Now let's look at making a negative past progressive sentence. To do this, again, I start with my subject, I use was or were, then not, and then the ing form of the verb. Here's another example. The players' effort and intensity were not waning during the long game. Okay, so here we might be talking again about a decrease or a weakening, right? And here we're not saying, we're saying there was no decrease. There was no weakening of like the effort, the intensity with which they were playing. Okay. Now let's look at a yes or no question in the past progressive. To do this, we start with our past form of be, so was or were. Depends on what the subject is. So we need our was or were to match our subject, and that subject comes next. Then we use the ing form of the verb. Here's another example. Was demand for the product waning when the company decided to close the factory? So here, again, we're talking about a decrease. So were many people not wanting to buy this any longer? Okay. Now let's talk about the past perfect. We use this verb tense many times in conjunction with the simple past tense. So you'll see one verb in the past perfect, one verb in the simple past. The verb in the past perfect is what happened before or what happened earlier. So that's one way to signal to our listeners or to our readers that this one action occurred before another. To make the past perfect, again, I have two P's, so I'm going to need two parts to my verb. I'm going to use the past form of have, which is had, and then I'm going to use the participle form of the verb. So in the affirmative, you're going to see subject, had, and then the participle. Here's an example sentence. The international concern for women's rights in Afghanistan had waned in recent months. Now, I borrowed this sentence from an article I was reading in connection to Women's History Month. This is the month of March is commonly when people take time to recognize, read, and discuss about women's contributions. And this article was noting that many people had sort of forgotten our interest in what's happening or what has been happening in Afghanistan, particularly as the Taliban has taken over control of the country again, and how women are being treated, right? So people were really interested for a while, and then that interest kind of decreased. We might see a little bit of an increase now in Women's History Month because people are paying more attention to those kinds of topics. Now, let's look at a negative past perfect sentence. To do this, I start with my subject, then I have my past form of my participle, had, then not, and then the participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Her love of teaching hadn't waned in 40 years. Okay. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the past perfect. To do this, I start with had. That's my perfect or my past form here of have, right? I'm going to have my subject, and then I'm going to have the participle form of my verb. Here's another example. Had his appetite waned before the treatment? So again, here, this would be sort of like the decrease. Here, not really interested in eating any longer. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words and phrases related to our verb wane. And the first word we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. So the noun wane has the exact same spelling and the exact same pronunciation. The first way you might hear the noun wane used is just to refer to the act or process of waning. So here we're talking about a decrease, a weakening of something. An example of this. The introduction of Paxlovid contributed to the wane of urgency to get new vaccines. Okay. This is a sentence I read in a recent article talking about people's sort of lack of interest in obtaining vaccines, obtaining boosters, and some have said that having treatment for COVID, so having this particular medicine, which tends to lessen symptoms, is maybe one of those things that decreased people's interest in getting a vaccination. A second way to use the noun wane is connected to the fifth definition of our verb, so that period of the full moon to the new moon. So we're kind of talking about that decrease. An example of this. With the new moon on the wane beginning a week from now, stargazers will have a better view. Okay. So again, if you're into astronomy, you might encounter either the noun or verb form of this word. But if that's not something that really interests you, then you aren't likely to see or hear it all that often. Now, there are a couple phrases connected to our verb of the day, wane. The first we're going to talk about is wax and wane. Wax, which can be a little surprising here, is going to mean increase. And as we've been discussing, wane is going to be talking about decreases. So you'll hear the phrase waxing and waning. And so we're talking about increases and decreases. And kind of that idea, at one point we're increasing, decreasing, increasing, decreasing, right? And kind of alternating between them. An example of this might be, hypnosis has had a waxing and waning history since the 1800s. So there are periods of time where many people were interested in this, maybe for medical treatment, maybe for other reasons, and then other periods of time where people are like, oh, this is crazy, we shouldn't be thinking about or using this, and then kind of up and down through history. Another phrase you might encounter is on the wane. So when people use this, they're generally talking about something becoming weaker, something becoming less extensive. An example of this. COVID infections and deaths are on the wane in China. Okay. Now, I borrowed this sentence from a newspaper article from a few months ago. Again, there were many examples connected to our pandemic and sort of increases and decreases related to it. So you might have encountered this phrase, and I hope for all of us, not only in China, but around the world, that the number of infections, the numbers of deaths continue to decrease, become less extensive. I hope this video has held your interest and it hasn't waned too much. I really thank everyone for subscribing, watching, leaving comments, making suggestions for future verbs. I hope everybody who's watched this far has a wonderful day.